Good morning and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. So if you're watching this, I realize I need to pull out my phone. This is not a new read-through. What we are going to do, and I'm going to wait just a second to explain this in the short because we're professional quality here. And I absolutely remembered to have my phone ready to record. Don't worry, guys. I'm sure this is what everyone's subscribed for. Good morning, everyone here. Joshua Pearsall with Practical Christian Lessons. And over the next 2 days, March 1st and 2nd, we are not going to start a new reading series. What we are going to do is have two different videos that I feel need to be put out. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting them out. So the first one is going to be, who is Jacob Arminius? A theologian of grace. No, it's not a review of the book. I'm just going to reference this book in the video. And then on Saturday, our video is going to be on assurance of salvation from an Arminian and a Wesleyan perspective. Pretty much the same. Maybe some slight differences if you look close enough between them, but pretty much the exact same. And that is going to be the next two videos over the next 2 days, just to let you guys know that. We will see you guys in the short. Go to the channel to find those videos. Otherwise, we'll see you Tuesday, because Monday, a new reading is coming out for Jacob Arminius. As for the rest of us, what I'm going to do is give a brief sort of historical overview, and then this will be part of a bigger playlist on the channel that you can go to and find, and I'll set them, I think my video should be at the top because it's the shortest, but just in order of length. And they're just all biographies, basically, of Jacob Arminius and sort of impact and other such things. And it's really good. It's really important, especially as Arminians. If you claim the title of an Arminian, especially, you probably should know your own heritage and where it came from. In this case, from the man Jacob Arminius, where though he's not necessarily starting a new theology, he did start the movement. Inadvertently, he started the movement that later became Arminianism when the Reformed tradition decided that Arminianism was not compatible with the Reformed tradition as a whole. That's why we split from them with the Synod of Dort. So Jacob Arminius himself was Reformed his entire life. He lived and died in the Reformed Church. He was a Dutch theologian who unfortunately lost his family as he was growing up. He was orphaned a little bit later in life. He wasn't a child, but he was also not yet a full-grown adult. Luckily, there were priests and such to take him in. Some actually theorize it was his uncle. I don't know enough on the research to attest to the validity of it. But through these priests and such that took him in, that sponsored him, it allowed him to go through school, to get education, to learn theology, and then himself later become a priest. And he was a priest for 15 years in the Reformed Church before he was later moved to Leighton University, at the time one of the premier, if not the premier, university for the Reformed tradition. And there he trained under Beza himself. If you don't know who Beza is, that is John Calvin's direct successor. Maybe protege is not the right word. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'm not as caught up on Reformed history itself as maybe some others. But he was the predecessor of John Calvin and got his seal of approval from Beza before then returning out into the rest of the world. And he would later return to Leighton University or maybe he didn't go to Leighton. He got educated under Beza. Don't quote me on that one. But he did return to Leighton University as a professor later in his life. He was called and answered the call. In his own notes, if you go through Oration 1, a little begrudgingly, perhaps. Maybe begrudging is not the right word, but a little hesitantly. He came forth and accepted the position as a professor at Leighton University, and later took a position of rector for a year, which is a pretty important spot for a university. And even shortly after that, for a short time, was helping run the entire university. There were a series of deaths in the headship, and it fell on him and then one of his opponents, really, unfortunately. And from there really stemmed a lot of the controversy started stemming after those deaths, is because the previous head of the university was very set on not letting things become super controversial and super hostile. The individual who was working with Arminius after the deaths, was not so set on this and seemed very much more set on division and conflict, confronting Arminius for his views rather than simply allowing Arminius to continue teaching. And what for everyone else he talked to, and Arminius himself had never been condemned of heresy for a good reason. He wasn't exactly teaching things that weren't at that time acceptable within the bounds of the Reformed tradition. Arminius repeatedly affirmed he was within the bounds of the Belgic Confession, he was within the bounds of the Heidelberg Catechism, and you see once the Synod of Dort comes, you go from the 2 forms of unity to the 3 forms of unity. That's not only when the Arminians get kicked out and some of them exiled and even executed. That's where you see tons of other groups also get forced out of the Reformed Church and even out of their actual physical location in the Netherlands. Arminius died in, I don't know why I'm looking at this. This is not for this portion of the video. Arminius died in 1609, unfortunately. He went before the Hague before that, which is where we get the Declaration of Sentiments. It's probably his most mature, I think is, Keith Stanglin puts it, the most mature formulation he has of predestination, and it is written for a lay audience. But he's cleared before the Hague. He's not condemned for teaching something that's unacceptable. He's not condemned as a heretic. And in 1609, he's in the middle of another meeting with some of the scholastic individuals, and he'd been through a series of meetings, conferences at this point to defend his teachings, and had again and again and again defended against charges of Pelagianism, semi-Pelagianism, of teaching contrary to the Reformed faith. Arminius himself stood every trial and came out on top. That is super important to note, and anyone who wants to disagree, you can go look it up yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. Arminius was not condemned in his own lifetime. And he died in 1609. I'm just going to touch on the Arminian movement that came after him, which is the Remonstrance. And that's sort of the people who took up the mantle of Arminius' teachings. And they made what they called the Remonstrance, and then were later called the Remonstrance. And they accept the title, and have now, of course, trickled down. Arminianism has stemmed from the split, if you will. And the Synod of Dort happened in 1618, right around there. 1619, because they had their first articles of the Remonstrance in 1609, and then another 5 articles in 1619, where they showed up and they thought they were showing up to be theological equals, showing up to a conversation, to a debate, to a dialogue, and were showing up actually as accused and already condemned defendants. And show the picture. This painting is very famous. It was painted by someone at the Synod of Dort. That is the Remonstrance in the middle, and this is everybody else. In the Netherlands at that time, if you were sitting in the middle, you didn't want to be sitting in the middle. You were the defendants in that case, and that is what they showed up for. Several of them were executed after the Synod of Dort. Many of them were excommunicated. It's not pretty. And a lot of the underlying issues there were mainly political. Unfortunately for the Arminian movement, it sided a lot with, the other videos should go into this. Had just been a civil war and a split within the Netherlands itself. And unfortunately, a lot of the folks on the Arminian side were siding with those who had been removed as far as merchants and political alliances. So it quickly moved from simply a theological topic to a political topic, and in a world where theology and politics are already so closely interconnected, they don't have the separation of church and state we have here in the United States. Church and state are the same. It got really hot really fast, and that is sort of the unfortunate consequence and falling out of what happened there. I'm not going to say that the Synod of Dort would have necessarily voted in favor of Arminian theology, but I don't think the condemnations would have been as harsh. I don't think there would have been executions if it had not become so political, and perhaps there may even have been some sort of compromise in theology reached between the two, or just Arminian theology modified and then would have been termed within acceptable bounds of Reformed theology. We'll never know. It's too late now. What's done is done. Hopefully moving forward, though, we can learn from this past. Some books for further reading that I will highly recommend. I'm sorry, I'm going to put my ring on. I have to take my ring off and on throughout the day. My fingers kind of swell up and it just hurts. There's a book I've mentioned in several videos, Jacob Arminius, Theologian of Grace. This is not necessarily a biography. It is a theological introduction to Jacob Arminius. And as Keith Stanglin and McCall put it, oh no, my little tab's kind of crooked and it's going to bug me. And now it's out. I'll have to fix that. They wanted a sort of like a one-stop shop. I don't know if that's their terminology or mine there, but where you could just come and find the theology of Jacob Arminius in one book, and a good introduction that covers not necessarily every little bit of his theology, but covers the entire broadness and will give you plenty of resources to continue reading and looking into. And they could not find it, so they wrote it. And it's really good. Really, really good. If you want to understand Jacob Arminius and by extension his impact on Arminian theology and other movements, his theology impacted far more than just the Arminian movement, whether or not certain folks want to admit that. But he had a huge impact on the world. He was a reformer in and of his own right. Not the Protestant reformers, but he was a reformer of notable magnitude. And this is where I'd recommend to look into his theology and introduction. And Keith Stanglin has written several books on Jacob Arminius theology, so that is where you want to look for that. For an actual biography introduction, historical, you're going to want to look at Karl Bangs. I don't have the title in front of me. I believe it is Arminius, A Look at the Dutch Reformation. I will confirm that real fast. Yes, it is Arminius, A Study in the Dutch Reformation. Very, very good and the go-to historical book. I talked about it in a previous video where I haven't read it quite myself yet fully. It is on my list to get to, but I have read parts of it. The next thing I'd recommend. And you'll find a link to the Declaration of Sentiments in a previous video. And this is Stephen Gunter's translation. And the reason this translation is notable, unlike the one I quoted, I believe it's in my predestination video. So go check that. You can find the link to just the Declaration of Sentiments in the description there. Is that one is translated from the Latin. This one is translated from the original Dutch that Arminius wrote it in. So that's a big deal. Translating it from the original language rather than like translating it twice. And this is an annotated translation with introduction and theological commentary. So you're not just getting the declaration, which is good to have, and I highly recommend just going through the full declaration as well. But you're getting some commentary and some insight into Arminius and his theology and such as you're going through it, and that's really good. And the declaration's already pretty accessible. It was written unlike some of Arminius's works, and if you watch the oration on Monday, oration 2, this will sort of be repetitive. Declaration of Sentiments was written for a lay audience. It was written for the Hague, which was a court, but it wasn't necessarily the great scholastic theologians of Arminius' times. They weren't necessarily dealing they haven't read Aquinas' Summa, for example. I'm sure some of them did, maybe, but it wouldn't have been part of their the common expectation of it going before an audience in the Hague. So that's what you'll get with this, and those are the books I would really, really recommend. Other things that I can recommend that aren't necessarily books, of course, my YouTube channel. You'll find a playlist on Arminianism, on Wesleyan Arminianism there. You can go check out. And just a heads up, if you do go through the Declaration of Sentiments, I don't have a script, but I do have some notes here. This is definitely one of his more polemical works, which I'm not necessarily all for on my channel. I mean, polemics have a place, and they're good, and they're important, as long as they're done correctly. But keep that in mind, especially if you are Reformed, especially if you're super lapsarian and you're going into the Declaration of Sentiments. It is going to be very polemical. If you're upset with that, I'm sorry. That's rough, buddy. But if you look at the things that were being said about Arminius in his day, this is very tame in comparison to the accusations that were levied at him, and the way he handled himself is sadly much better than many of his contemporaries and opponents were handling accusations of him. So it's just an unfortunate part of history, but here we are. I would also recommend, and we'll get to this at some point on the channel, but it's probably going to be a while, is Jacob Arminius's letter to Perkins. That's also one of his works addressing the predestination discussion in particular. But that's a big work. And then chapter 3 of Theologian of Grace specifically also addresses a lot of the more polemical discussions. Sorry, it's only proceeding. And then we do have a What is an Arminian video. We'll have that in the playlist, and I'll have more that has more recommendations more for theology than necessarily Jacob Arminius. Both of these books, I believe, are going to be in there as well, along with quite a few other things. So that is all for today. Check out each of the playlists. I'm not going to bother linking the playlists themselves. They are on my channel. You go to my channel, you go to my playlist. There's not a whole lot of them currently. There will be over time. But right now it's pretty easy to navigate. So you guys have a wonderful day. God bless. And if you want to keep on this journey, let's keep on.